Obviously, when we've had a whole number of speakers tonight who've all talked about this issue and the importance of it, I don't want to repeat a lot of things that people have said, particularly about the cost of the war, which I agree very, very much, and also the idea that we do need these cuts. I mean, it does seem to me an incredible society that you live in, where there's no question, supposedly, of putting Trident into the Defence Review, but we are cutting, or we're proposing to cut, benefits for people who are disabled, for children, for the sick. I mean, this is a sick society that has these kind of priorities, and I think that we could all find much, much better things to do than spend the money on war and the weapons, which this government, unfortunately, continuing the policies of the last government, is doing. I just want to really say where I think the war in Afghanistan is, because we had last week the marking of the 300th British soldier who died since this war began. Now, this is a terrible figure, although, as Caroline has said, of course, the figure for the Afghan deaths is much, much higher, and nobody really knows, but they know it goes into many, many thousands tens of thousands of deaths. Even back in 2001, it was estimated that 10,000 people died. But the really alarming thing about that figure of 300, it is only 10 months since it was the 200th British soldier who died. In other words, in less than a year, we've had that figure. Now, I think I'm right in saying that for the first 5 years of this war, only 7 British soldiers were killed in the war in Afghanistan. In fact, in 2002, the Americans only had 5,000 troops in Afghanistan because they believed the war was over, the Taliban were defeated, and that this was really wouldn't be a country that they would have to continue fighting a hot war in. So this gives you a sign of how it's escalating and how this isn't just true of the British troops, although the point that's been made is that the British are disproportionately now suffering deaths, but this is happening to all the NATO forces and all the people who have died. So that is, it seems to me, a very big question. The question of the £20 billion that the war in Afghanistan and Iraq have now cost in Britain is clearly one which should be thrown into any serious legislative body. Any serious government should consider what they think the point of that kind of expenditure and the ongoing expenditure, not just of the wars, but of course the whole loss of earnings from people who become injured in the wars, the cost of caring for the people who become injured in the wars. All of these things should really be put in the equation. But there's also another thing, which is what is now happening with the war in Afghanistan. It seems to me on practically a daily basis is that people who really should be supporting the war are now saying, can it win? Is it going to win? Shouldn't we be talking to the Taliban? The latest yesterday is General Sir David Richards, who said, well, this is my private opinion, but we are going to have to talk to the Taliban sooner or later, and we might as well get used to this, really. The points that Eric was making is absolutely true. McChrystal was sacked, allegedly, for the Rolling Stone interview, which is a fascinating interview. In fact, the BBC dramatised it. They had a reading of it at the weekend, such is the impact of this one interview. But really, when you look at why McChrystal has gone, partly, obviously, he was bitterly opposed to Obama personally, but there's also a huge division inside the American establishment, a huge division inside the British establishment about what the hell they are doing in this war and what really the outcome will be. And it seems to me that this is something, it's like a person who's stuck on a ledge. They can't go forward and they can't go back. But of course they can't win in Afghanistan. I think absolutely clearly they can't now win in Afghanistan. I think most people probably would admit, publicly or privately, even a lot of, and perhaps especially a lot of the people in the military would admit that. But of course they can't really go back, because to go back opens up such a vista of defeat for them that it's very, very difficult for them to do. It will come at some point, but it's extremely hard for them to do, and therefore I guess the war will get worse before it ends and before it gets better. And this it seems to me, is compounded by the fact that President Karzai, who only a few weeks ago was saying he was thinking of joining the Taliban, no doubt in jest, but was saying this, has just sacked his ministers, the two ministers who are the most pro-American ministers. In other words, he's trying to create an alternative scenario which relies on his neighbours, including Iran, including China, including Pakistan, all of which gives huge problems to American and British foreign policy. So I think we've got to look at where the war is. It's absolutely stuck in failure, and this is a consequence, in my opinion, of the whole way in which the war was waged and what it was waged about, because it's absolutely clear there is not Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, where there clearly is Al-Qaeda in, for example, Yemen, in Somalia, and some of these places, and they don't really know what to do about any of these problems, because it's the policies of the government which has led to the spreading of this situation and has led to the disaster which now really is in the Middle East. Now, people have talked, and I agree absolutely, we have to get the troops out, but we have to build a mass campaign again to do this. 77% of people in this country say they want the troops out by the end of this year. I don't know why it's always Christmas that is given us the time when people should get out, but by Christmas, 3/4 around that of the population want them to get out. I think we have to have a campaign which obviously isn't just in Parliament and isn't just about what we do here, but I do think we are in a very interesting situation here. I don't know if people heard the reports this morning on the radio about the demonstrations in Iraq which are going on in places like Basra, where people are only getting 5 hours of electricity a day. Now, you can understand the anger that must be brewing in that country after, this is 6 years after the invasion and occupation there, but this is still going. Britain and America are not in a position to reconstruct these countries. They're not interested. We know from Liam Fox that he said, we're not there to create an education system for a 13th century country. We're there to protect British interests, and that is, they are not capable. 10 times as much is spent on the military as is spent on reconstruction in Afghanistan, and of course they don't have any kind of allies. But we have to think about how we do build that campaign. You see, we've got the legacy, nearly 10 years now, of these wars. How are we going to change it? Well, one of the things that I think we can do, and I think it's very, very encouraging that obviously more MPs, I think, probably from all parties, are becoming more and more unhappy about the war and Trident and what these things really mean. It does seem to me that this coalition government is particularly vulnerable on this question, because it's a government where certainly the Lib Dems, many people voted for the Lib Dems, believing that somehow this was an anti-war party, or would be, and certainly didn't think it would be in a position where it presided over a continuing war. And many people who voted Lib Dem, I think, would probably have voted Labour but for the war in Iraq, and that was why many people did go in that direction. Now, I think that means there is great pressure that could be put on them. I think there's great pressure that could even be put on the Tories, because although the Tories have traditionally been more pro-war, as Eric Joyce has said, actually, Cameron seems to be, he's certainly more sceptical about the kind of humanitarian intervention side of wars, and he has already said that maybe we should put a time limit of 5 years. Now, I think this is a weak government over this question. When you tie it in with the cost of the war and the cost of Trident and all these things, I think it is very, very vulnerable, and we have to try to campaign both inside and outside Parliament to turn this into a mass movement which can get the troops out, which can say we're not having the money which is spent on Trident happening year after year after year. We want the money spent on what people in this country would really like to see the money spent on: education and health and housing and all these kind of things. And it seems to me this has to be, we have to turn this into one of the major political issues in this country. With the exceptions of people like Paul Flynn, they managed to avoid making it a major issue in the election campaign. Now the election is over, we have to make sure that every MP, that everybody in this House knows exactly where the majority of people in their constituency stand on these questions, and that they will, and they need the information, they need all these things in order that we can win a